dawn broke like shattered glass across the mesa, and Elias Brennan stood alone on his porch, coffee growing cold in his tin cup. The ranch sprawled before him, 40 acres of stubborn hope carved from unforgiving land. His dog Ghost whined, pressing against his legs as vultures circled something distant. 3 years since cholera took Martha. 3 years of silence broken only by wind and the creak of his windmill pump. But this morning felt different. The vultures dropped lower, their shadows crossing his water spring where he'd found moccasin prints yesterday. Someone had watched him in the night. Ghost growled low, hackles rising. Elias set down his cup, studying the drag marks leading toward Skeleton Canyon. The Apache hadn't raided this far north in 2 seasons, yet those tracks were fresh as morning bread. "Stay here, boy," he murmured, reaching for his Winchester. But Ghost was already running toward the canyon, and Elias had no choice but to follow. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The arroyo cut deep into red earth, its walls throwing back Ghost's barking in hollow echoes. Elias scrambled down the loose shale, Winchester ready, his boots finding purchase on jutting rocks. The morning sun hadn't reached the canyon floor yet, leaving everything in blue shadow except where a shaft of light illuminated something that made him stop dead. A woman lay sprawled beneath a dying mesquite, and even from 20 feet away, Elias could see she was Apache. But it was her size that stole his breath. She had to be nearly 6 feet tall, with the powerful build of someone accustomed to hard living. Her beaded dress, though dusty and torn, showed elaborate craftsmanship that spoke of high status. A silver concho belt caught the light, and turkey vulture feathers adorned her hair, now matted with sweat and sand. Ghost had stopped barking, creeping forward with his belly low, a whine building in his throat. Elias approached carefully, noting the cracked lips, the sunken eyes, the way her chest barely rose and fell. Heat sickness, he'd seen it before. Without water, she'd be dead by noon. His canvas water bag hung heavy at his side. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to pretend he'd never seen her. Apache warriors could be watching from the rim. This could be a trap. The militia in town would hang him for helping an Apache, especially now with tensions running high after the raid on the Hernandez spread. But then her eyes opened intelligent, proud, fever-bright, and she looked straight at him. Not pleading, not afraid, just looking, waiting to see what manner of man stood before her. Elias knelt, uncorking his water bag. Her hand shot up with surprising strength, crushing his wrist, her eyes wild with suspicion. "Easy," he said softly, the same tone he'd used with Martha in her final fever. "Just water. Agua." She held his gaze for a long moment, then released him. He poured water slowly between her cracked lips, watching her throat work to swallow. Some ran down her chin, leaving pale tracks through the dust. Ghost crept closer, and she spoke to him in Apache, her voice like sand on stone. The dog's tail gave a single, uncertain wag. "Father," she whispered in accented English, her eyes rolling back. "Warriors. Searching." Elias's hands trembled as he checked her for wounds, finding only the ravages of sun and thirst. He thought of Martha, how he'd held water to her lips that last terrible night, how he'd failed to save her. But this woman, this enemy, his neighbors would say she still had a chance. The willow travois he'd brought for gathering firewood would hold her weight. He fashioned a shade with his jacket and began the slow work of moving her. She groaned once, speaking rapid Apache mixed with Spanish, something about storms and separation. In her pouch, he found pemmican and a small doeskin bag marked with symbols he couldn't read. As he secured her on the travois, he noticed the quality of her moccasins, the intricate beadwork that must have taken months to complete. This was no common woman. The weight of his decision settled on him like a stone. He was bringing an Apache, possibly a chief's daughter or wife, into his home. If the warriors found him, if the militia discovered what he'd done... "Come on, Ghost," he said, taking up the travois poles. We're about to break every unwritten rule in the territory." The dog trotted beside him as he dragged his dangerous burden toward the ranch. Behind them, a century plant bloomed in the morning light, its once-in-a-lifetime flowering witnessed only by the circling vultures. Above, the sky stretched endless and blue, giving no sign of the storm about to break over Elias Brennan's life. The woman muttered again, her voice stronger now with the water in her. "Nietzsche," she said clearly. And Elias nearly dropped the poles. Chief Nietzsche, war leader of the Chiricahua. If this woman belonged to him... But Elias kept walking, because his mother had raised him right, and because somewhere in the last 3 years of silence, he'd forgotten what it meant to choose anything beyond mere survival. The woman's weight pulled at his shoulders, each step a decision renewed. In the distance, his ranch house waited, small and alone beneath the vast morning sky. He didn't see the Apache scout watching from the rim, or the dust cloud of riders approaching from the town. He only knew the weight of the travois, the heat climbing his back, and Ghost padding faithfully beside him. The woman's breathing had steadied, no longer the shallow gasps of the dying, but the deeper rhythm of someone fighting their way back to life. That's what decided it. Finally. Not duty or conscience or fear of damnation, just the sound of another human being choosing to live, and his own choice to help her do it. The ranch gate stood open before him. Once he crossed that threshold, there would be no going back. Elias shifted his grip on the poles, felt the burn in his shoulders, and pulled his burden home. The cabin had never felt smaller. Elias carried the Apache woman to his bed, Martha's bed, and for a moment stood frozen at the threshold. The brass bed frame gleamed in the afternoon light, the wedding quilt still smooth and untouched after 3 years. But the woman's labored breathing broke his paralysis. He laid her down gently, her weight settling into the goose-down pillows Martha had brought from Missouri. First things first, he opened every window, creating a cross breeze that stirred the calico curtains. The ticking clock on the mantel marked each second as he worked, its familiar rhythm steady against the chaos of his racing thoughts. He stripped away the woman's torn outer dress with clinical efficiency, covering her with clean quilts, trying not to think about how long it had been since anyone else had lain in this bed. In the kitchen, he set water to boil and rummaged through Martha's medicine chest. Lavender water for fever, his wife had sworn by it. Willow bark for tea, the way his grandmother had taught him back in Ohio before the war. His hands moved with remembered purpose, crushing the bark with a pestle worn smooth by generations of use. The woman thrashed suddenly, speaking rapid Apache. Elias rushed back with a cool compress, and as he placed it on her forehead, her hand shot up and grabbed his wrist. Her eyes opened, focused with startling clarity. "You could have left me." "Why?" she whispered in English. The question hung between them like smoke. Elias found himself really looking at her for the first time, not as an Apache, not as a problem to solve, but as a person. Her face, beneath the fever's flush, held a fierce dignity that reminded him of Martha in her final days, refusing to surrender even as her body failed. "My mother raised me to help folks in need," he said simply. "Don't matter much what folks they are." Her grip loosened, but she didn't let go entirely. "Your mother, wise woman. She had her moments." He dipped the compress again, and this time she released him, allowing him to tend her. "What's your name?" But she had slipped back into delirium, muttering about storms and warriors, her father and sacred mountains. Elias spent the next hours in a careful dance of care, spooning willow bark tea between her lips, changing compresses, checking her breathing. When dusk fell, he lit beeswax candles rather than the coal oil lamp, their softer light less likely to disturb her rest. Ghost had positioned himself by the bed, alert to every sound she made. Around midnight, something shifted. The woman's breathing deepened, the terrible heat finally breaking. Sweat beaded on her skin, and Elias gently wiped it away with a clean cloth. She looked younger now, perhaps 30 summers, with laugh lines around her eyes that suggested a life beyond warfare and survival. He dozed in Martha's rocking chair, waking each time the clock chimed. At 3 in the morning, he found her watching him, fully conscious. "Water," she said. And he helped her drink from Martha's good china teacup, the one with tiny roses painted around the rim. "How long?" she asked. "Since this morning. You had heat sickness bad. Thought I might lose you around sundown, but you fought through." She studied him in the candlelight. "You are alone here?" It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. 3 years now. Cholera took my wife. The sickness that comes with the wagon trains." She nodded slowly. "It took many of my people, too." She tried to sit up, winced, and let him help her. "I must go. My father's warriors are probably combing every canyon from here to Mexico looking for you." Elias pulled a cavalry blanket up around her shoulders. "You're not strong enough to make it a mile, much less find them in the dark. You do not understand. I am Ayana, daughter of Chief Naichi. If they find me here, then they find you alive and recovering, instead of dead in an arroyo." He met her gaze steadily. "I made my choice when I brought you here. I'll stand by it." She studied him for a long moment. "You are either very brave or very foolish. White man. Name's Elias Brennan, and I've been called both, usually in the same breath." Despite everything, she smiled a brief flash that transformed her face. "Elias. In my tongue, it means the Lord is my God. My mother was partial to biblical names. My brother got Samuel. Always thought he got the better end of that deal. Samuel still lives, back in Ohio, runs a dry goods store, writes me every Christmas telling me to come home, sell this place. But you stay. This land, it's hard and unforgiving, but it's honest. No pretense. You either survive or you don't. After Martha died, I couldn't go back to Ohio's gentle lies." Ayana was quiet for a moment. "I understand this. After the reservation, after the surrenders and broken promises, my father chose to keep fighting. Not for victory, he knows that time has passed, but for truth, for the right to die as Apache, not as shadows of ourselves." "How did you come to be alone in that canyon?" 3 days ago, a sudden storm. The flash flood separated me from our scouting party. I tried to find them, but the heat." She gestured weakly. "I remember reaching the canyon, seeking shade, then nothing until your dog's barking. Ghost doesn't usually take to strangers. He knows I mean no harm. Animals always know." She shifted, wincing. "Your kindness will bring you trouble. The town people have never much cared for me anyway. Martha was the one who smoothed things over, made us acceptable, without her. I'm just that strange man who keeps to himself. And now you will be the man who helped an Apache." "I suppose I will." The clock chimed 4. Outside, a screech owl called, and Ghost's ears perked up. "You should rest more," Elias said. "Dawn's coming soon enough, and you'll need your strength. You will let me leave when you're ready, not before. I didn't drag you all this way just to watch you collapse again." She lay back against the pillows. "Your wife's things, the cup, the quilts. This was her bed. Yes. It honors me that you trust me with them." Elias stood, suddenly needing distance from the intimacy of the moment. "I'll make some food. You need more than tea in your stomach." As he moved toward the kitchen, her voice stopped him. "Elias, my father's warriors will come. They will find me, they always do. When they arrive, we'll deal with it. For now, you're a guest under my roof. That means something. Even out here." He left her then, busying himself with cornmeal and preserved beef, trying not to think about what sunrise might bring. Through the window, stars were already fading. Somewhere out there, Apache warriors searched for their chief's daughter. Somewhere else, the good citizens of Brackett would be stirring, preparing for another day of civilizing the frontier. And here, in this small cabin between worlds, Elias Brennan had chosen a side without fully understanding the consequences. All he knew was that for the first time in 3 years, the house didn't feel empty. The woman's presence, Ayana's presence, had shifted something fundamental, not romantic, not even friendship yet, but a connection. Two people who had lost much, finding themselves on opposite sides of a war neither had chosen, recognizing something human in each other. Ghost padded into the kitchen, tail wagging slightly, and Elias absently scratched his ears. "We've done it now, boy," he murmured. "No going back." From the bedroom, he heard Ayana's breathing deepen into sleep. The clock ticked on, marking time toward whatever dawn would bring. Elias woke to silence so complete it pressed against his eardrums like deep water. No morning birds, no coyotes finishing their night hunts. Even the ever-present wind had died. Ghost stood rigid by the door, not barking, not growling, just trembling against Elias's legs as he rose from the chair where he'd dozed. Through the window, the eastern sky showed the faintest pink of pre-dawn. Ayana was already awake, sitting up in bed, her head cocked as if listening to something beyond human hearing. "They are here," she said simply. Elias's mouth went dry. "Your people. Yes, many of them." She swung her legs over the side of the bed, testing her strength. "Help me dress. I will not meet my father like an invalid." He retrieved her cleaned dress from where it hung by the fire, the beadwork catching the candlelight. As she dressed with careful dignity, he noticed how her hands didn't shake, how she braided her hair with practiced efficiency despite her weakness. She was preparing for something: judgment, reunion. He couldn't tell. "How many?" he asked, checking the load on his Winchester more from habit than any belief it would matter. "All of them," she said. "When a chief's daughter goes missing, the entire band searches." Elias moved to the window, his old spyglass telescope in hand. The instrument had belonged to his father in the war between the states, its brass worn smooth by nervous hands. He raised it to his eye, scanning the still dark ridgelines. Nothing. Just the familiar silhouettes of mesa and mountain against the lightening sky. Then the sun crested the eastern mesa, the light spread like poured honey across the landscape, and Elias's breath caught in his throat. They were everywhere, on every ridgeline, every high point. Warriors sat their horses in perfect stillness. The rising sun caught on silver medallions, on the points of war lances adorned with feathers, on the painted symbols decorating both horses and men. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just sat there like bronze statues carved from the morning itself. 10 on the nearest ridge, 20 on the next. His hands shook as he tried to count. 50, 100, more appearing as the light strengthened, revealing what darkness had concealed. The silence was worse than any war cry would have been. 300 warriors, maybe more, surrounding his small ranch in perfect, terrible formation. "Mother of God," Elias whispered. Ghost whined and pressed harder against his legs. The dog's whole body vibrated with the need to bark, to warn, to do something, but some ancient instinct kept him silent. Ayana appeared beside him, fully dressed now, the morning light making her silver concho belt gleam. She looked out at her people with an expression he couldn't read: pride, fear, resignation, all mixed together. "They waited for dawn," she said, "to show you their numbers, to give you the chance to see what you face. Will they?" He stopped, unsure what to even ask. "That depends on my father, and on you." She turned to him. "When he comes, do not lie. Do not grovel. Stand straight and speak truth. He respects nothing else." Through the spyglass, Elias saw movement. A single rider was descending from the highest point, picking his way down the steep trail with unhurried precision. Even at this distance, Elias could see this was no ordinary warrior. His horse was a magnificent black stallion with Spanish bloodlines, its bit and tack adorned with silver. The rider himself wore deerskin leggings and a vest decorated with intricate patterns. No war paint, but something in his bearing that made paint unnecessary. Your father. Yes, Chief Nietzsche. He comes alone to show he does not fear you. Well, that makes one of us, Elias muttered, his attempt at humor falling flat in the charged air. The ride from ridge to ranch gate took perhaps 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Elias watched through the spyglass as other warriors began to move, closing the circle gradually, maintaining their silence. By the time Nietzsche reached the gate, they had formed concentric rings around the property close enough to hear everything, far enough to seem like part of the landscape itself. Nietzsche dismounted at the gate with fluid grace. He was not a large man, but he carried himself in a way that made size irrelevant. His face was weathered leather stretched over sharp bones, his eyes dark and unreadable as deep wells. He stood there, waiting. I must go to him, Ayanna said. You can barely walk. Then you will help me. It wasn't a request. Elias set down the Winchester, knowing how useless it was anyway, and offered her his arm. Together they walked out onto the porch, then slowly toward the gate. Ghost followed, belly low, occasionally letting out a nearly inaudible whine. As they approached, Nietzsche's eyes never left Elias's face. Not a glance at his daughter, not a flicker of emotion. Just that steady, measuring stare that seemed to look through skin and bone to whatever lay beneath. Ayanna spoke rapidly in Apache, her voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. Elias caught his own name several times, and what might have been water and kindness. Nietzsche didn't respond, didn't move, just continued to stare at Elias. Finally, Ayanna stopped talking. The silence stretched until Elias could hear his own heartbeat, could hear Ghost panting beside him, could hear the leather of Nietzsche's horse's saddle creaking as the animal shifted. Then Nietzsche spoke, his English accented but clear. Why did you help her? It was the question Elias had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. He could feel the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on him, knew that his answer would determine not just his fate, but possibly the fate of every ranch within 50 miles. If Nietzsche decided he was a threat, if this became a war party instead of a search party. Elias straightened his shoulders, met those dark eyes directly. She needed help. I was there. Sometimes it's that simple. Nothing is simple between Apache and white man. Maybe not, but between one human being and another dying of thirst, that's about as simple as it gets. Nietzsche's expression didn't change. You knew she was Apache. Yes. You knew the danger. Yes. Yet you brought her to your home, fed her, gave her your wife's bed. Elias felt a flicker of surprise that Nietzsche knew about Martha, but of course he did. Ayanna had been talking for several minutes. My wife would have done the same. She was a better person than me, but I try to remember what she would do. Your wife is dead. 3 years now. The sickness, yes. It killed many Apache too. For the first time, something shifted in Nietzsche's face, not softness exactly, but a recognition. You did not fear my warriors would come. I figured they might. Yet you helped her anyway. A person dying of thirst is just a person dying of thirst. Doesn't matter if they're Apache, Mexican, or the Queen of England. Nietzsche was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the warriors sat their horses in perfect stillness, but Elias could feel their attention like heat from a fire. The sun was fully up now, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. A hawk circled overhead, its cry the only sound in the vast quiet. You could have left her, Nietzsche said finally. No one would have known. I would have known. You could join with the town people against us. You choose to stand alone. I choose to stand for what's right. If that means standing alone, then I stand alone. Naichi turned to his daughter for the first time. Speaking in Apache, she responded, her voice steady despite her obvious weakness. He asked something sharp, and she gestured to Elias, to the cabin, speaking with what sounded like conviction. The chief turned back to Elias. She says you treated her with honor, that you asked nothing, took nothing, gave everything needed. She was a guest under my roof. That means something. Even when the guest is your enemy. I don't recall declaring war on anybody, but I'm just a rancher trying to scratch a living from hard land. Your daughter needed help. I gave it. That's the whole of it. Naichi studied him for another long moment, then raised his hand. The movement was small, but its effect was immediate. The warriors began to move, not toward the ranch but spreading out, forming a looser perimeter. The tension, while not gone, shifted into something less immediately threatening. You are either very brave or very foolish, Elias Brennan, Naichi said, echoing his daughter's words from the night before. I've been told that, usually by people smarter than me. Something that might have been amusement flickered in Naichi's eyes. My daughter will stay until she is strong. You will continue to care for her. It wasn't a question, but Elias nodded anyway. Of course. And when she is well, you will bring her to the sacred mountains. You know the place. The dragoons. Yes. Come alone. You will not be harmed. Naichi turned to go, then paused. You have earned something today. White man. Something rare. What's that? Time to understand what you have earned. With that cryptic statement, he mounted his horse and rode away, not hurrying, not looking back. One by one, the warriors wheeled their horses and followed, until the ridgelines were empty again, as if they had never been there at all. Only the dust hanging in the air and the tracks leading in every direction proved it hadn't been a dream. Elias realized he'd been holding his breath and let it out in a long stream. Beside him, Ayanna swayed, and he caught her before she could fall. You did well, she said weakly. Better than well. What did I earn? What did he mean? But she had fainted, the morning's stress finally overwhelming her weakened body. Elias carried her back to the cabin, Ghost finally allowing himself a few sharp barks at the departing dust clouds. Inside, he settled her back into bed, checking her pulse, her breathing. Through the window, he could see the last of the Apache disappearing over the ridgelines. 300 warriors had surrounded his ranch, and he was still alive. More than that, he'd been given some sort of approval, though he didn't understand what it meant yet. Time to understand what you have earned. The clock on the mantel resumed its ticking, suddenly loud in the normal morning quiet. Outside, birds began to sing again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The day was starting properly now, the sun warming the desert, the wind picking up its eternal conversation with the sand. But everything had changed. Elias could feel it in his bones, in the way Ghost kept pacing to the window and back, in the way even the familiar walls of his cabin seemed different. He'd stood between worlds this morning and somehow hadn't been crushed between them. Not yet, anyway. Naichi hadn't left. After sending his warriors to wider positions, he'd returned to Elias's gate with 3 of his men. They stood there now, patient as stones, waiting to be invited in. Ayanna stirred in the bed, trying to rise despite her weakness. He wants to know you, she explained, her voice hoarse, to judge if his trust is warranted. And if he decides it isn't, she didn't answer, which was answer enough. Elias helped her to Martha's rocking chair, wrapping the cavalry blanket around her shoulders, then walked out to meet the chief. Come in, he said simply, stepping aside. The 4 Apache entered his home with measured steps. The 3 warriors immediately began a careful examination of the cabin, not touching anything at first, just observing. Their eyes missed nothing: the books on the shelf, the rifle mounted above the door, the kitchen with its neat rows of preserved goods. One warrior, younger than the others with a scar across his jaw, paused at Martha's photograph on the mantel, studying the daguerreotype with intense interest. Naichi moved differently. He walked straight to Elias's table and sat without invitation. his bearing making it clear this was now his space. The scarred warrior brought him something from outside a leather pouch and set it before him. Naichi gestured to the chair opposite. Elias sat, noting how the other warriors positioned themselves, one by the door, one by the window, the scarred one behind Naichi. Not threatening exactly, but ready, always ready. "Your woman," Naichi said, pointing to the photograph. "She was beautiful." "She was. How did she die?" "Cholera, summer of 78. Lasted 9 days. Elias kept his voice steady, though the memory still burned. "I tried everything. Brought a doctor from town. Prayed to every god I could name. Nothing helped. You stayed with her. To the end. Even knowing the sickness might take you. She was my wife. Where else would I be?" Naichi absorbed this, then picked up the family Bible from the shelf where the scarred warrior had noted it. He opened it to the family record page, running his finger down the entries in Martha's careful script. Births, marriages, deaths, all recorded in fading ink. "You have no children. We lost 2, 1 stillborn, 1 lived 3 days, both buried out back under the oak. Yet you stay in this place of ghosts." Elias met his gaze directly. "They're my ghosts. I earned them. Leaving wouldn't make them go away, just make them harder to visit." The scarred warrior spoke in Apache, something that sounded like a question. Naichi responded, then translated, "He asks why you have no new woman. 3 years is long enough to mourn." "Maybe, but there's not exactly a line of women eager to share a lonely ranch with a man who talks more to his dog than to people. You choose solitude. It chose me. I just didn't fight it." Naichi set down the Bible and leaned back, studying Elias with those penetrating eyes. "Tell me about the war." Elias stiffened. "Which war?" "The one that left marks on your soul. Not scars on your body, those heal. The other kind." "I don't." "Every soldier knows another soldier, even years later, even across enemies. You fought in your people's great war." "Which side?" "Union, Ohio, 23rd Infantry, 3 years, mostly in Virginia." "You killed?" "Yes, many. I stopped counting after Antietam." "Yet you helped my daughter. The war taught me something about killing, mainly that once you start, it's hard to stop, and that dead men all look the same, no matter what uniform they wore." Naichi was quiet for a moment, then reached for the leather pouch. From it, he withdrew a flask Apache made, with intricate beadwork. He set it on the table between them. "Tiswin," he said. "Apache beer. We share it with those we would know better." Elias stood and went to his cabinet, pushing aside the everyday bottles to reach the back. His hand closed on dusty glass Kentucky bourbon, the good stuff, saved for an occasion he'd never thought would come. The label was worn but readable, Frankfurt Reserve, bottled 1876. He returned with 2 glasses and the bourbon, setting them on the table with steady hands. "I helped her because my mother raised me right," he said, pouring amber liquid into both glasses. "Nothing more complicated than that." Naichi accepted the glass, inhaling the whiskey's aroma. "Your mother, tell me of her." "Ohio farm woman. Raised 6 kids through the war while my father was gone. Buried 2 of them. Never complained. Never turned away anyone hungry. Even when we barely had enough. She used to say that kindness was like water in the desert, rare, precious, and meant to be shared. Wise woman. She would have liked Ayana. Would have said any woman who could survive what she survived had steel in her spine." They drank in silence, the bourbon burning warm while Naichi poured his Tiswin into Elias's empty glass. The Apache beer was lighter, slightly sweet, with an aftertaste of mesquite. The warriors had completed their examination of the cabin. The scarred one spoke at length to Naichi, gesturing to various items. Elias caught references to the books, the photograph, the neatly kept spaces. Another warrior added something about the root cellar and the well-maintained equipment. Ayanna translated from her chair, her voice weak but clear. They discuss your character. Swift Knife says you keep house like a woman but work tools like a man. He is confused by this. Red Sky says you have many books, which means you seek wisdom. Young Eagle notes you have few weapons for a man alone on the frontier. Don't need many weapons if you're not looking for fights, Elias said. Naichi poured another round of bourbon. You read. My mother insisted. Said education was the only thing no one could steal from you. What do you read? Whatever I can get. Shakespeare, the Bible, month-old newspapers from town. Last book was about agriculture in arid climates. Trying to figure out how to make this land produce something besides dust and disappointment. And do you learn? I've learned the land gives what it chooses, when it chooses. All I can do is be ready when it decides to be generous. Naichi picked up one of the books, a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Roman philosophy. A man gets lonely enough. Even dead Romans make good company. What does this dead Roman say? Elias thought for a moment. That we can't control what happens to us, only how we respond. That revenge and hatred poison the soul. That every man is your brother, even your enemy. You believe this. I try to. Don't always succeed, but trying seems important. The scarred warrior Swift Knife interjected something sharp. Naichi responded, then asked Elias, if the town people come for Ayanna, what will you do? Tell them to leave, and if they refuse, then I'll defend my guest, against your own people. A mob isn't my people. My people, my real people, are all dead. What's left is just folks trying to survive, same as everyone else. Some do it better than others. Some do it with honor, some without. I choose which group I stand with. You would die for an Apache woman you met yesterday. I'd die for the principle that a person under my roof is under my protection. The fact that she's Apache is irrelevant. Naichi and his warriors exchanged looks. The conversation in Apache grew animated, with Swift Knife seeming to argue against something while Red Sky supported it. Young Eagle remained silent, watching Elias with unblinking attention. Finally, Naichi raised his hand for silence. He stood, walking to where Ayanna sat, and spoke to her at length in their language. She responded, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, gesturing to Elias, to the cabin, to the bed where she'd been tended. Naichi returned to the table, but remained standing. My daughter says you could have demanded payment, could have sent word to the fort for reward money, could have used her for your pleasure while she was weak. You did none of these things. Why? Elias stood too, feeling this was somehow important. Because I'm trying to be the man my mother thought she raised, the man my wife believed I was. Some days I fail. Yesterday wasn't one of them. The silence stretched taut. Then Naichi reached into his pouch again, withdrawing something wrapped in deerskin. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a silver medallion on a leather cord. The metalwork was intricate Apache symbols intertwined with what looked like Spanish colonial designs. This marks safe passage through Apache lands, he said. Show it to any of my people, and you will not be harmed. Elias felt the weight of what was being offered. I'm honored, but... Do you refuse, boy? No, but I have something to offer in return. He went to Martha's jewelry box, unopened for 3 years. Inside, among her simple treasures, lay a silver locket. He opened it, showing the tiny photographs inside himself and Martha on their wedding day. Then he closed it and offered it to Naichi. For Ayanna, my wife would want her to have it. Naichi examined the locket, then nodded slowly. You give your wife's treasure to an enemy. I give a gift to a woman who survived against all odds. Martha would understand. Naichi handed the locket to Swift Knife, who would apparently carry it for now. Then the chief placed the medallion around Elias's neck himself, the gesture formal, significant. You have earned more than safe passage, Elias Brennan. You have earned respect. This is rarer than gold among my people. He turned to leave. then paused at the door. Care for my daughter until she is strong, then bring her to the sacred mountains. We will speak again. Chief Naichi, Elias called as the Apache leader reached the threshold. What would you have done if you'd decided I wasn't trustworthy? Naichi's expression didn't change. You would never have seen us leave. The four Apache filed out, mounting their horses with fluid grace. As they rode away, Ayana spoke from her chair. You did something today few white men have done. You spoke truth to Naichi and lived. More than lived, you gained his protection. Will it matter when the town finds out what happened here? That depends on whether you value their opinion more than his respect. Elias fingered the medallion, its weight unfamiliar against his chest. Through the window, he could see the Apache riding toward the mountains, their figures growing smaller against the vast landscape. The bourbon and Tiswin sat on the table, two different worlds sharing space for a brief moment. Help me back to bed, Ayana said. This day has exhausted us both. As he helped her walk, she asked, Why did you really give me your wife's locket? Elias considered his answer. Because holding on to it won't bring her back. And maybe it's time I stopped trying to live in a museum of my own grief. She squeezed his arm gently. Your wife chose well when she chose you. Some days I wonder. Don't. A man who shares his last good whiskey with an Apache chief and speaks only truth has nothing to wonder about. As she settled back into bed, Elias noticed the cabin felt different. Not empty anymore. Not full exactly, but inhabited in a way it hadn't been for 3 years. The medallion rested against his chest, warm from his skin, a tangible reminder that his world had just gotten larger and more complicated. Outside, dust devils danced across the yard, and Ghost had finally relaxed enough to chase a lizard. The clock ticked on, marking time toward whatever came next. But for now, in this moment, Elias felt something he hadn't experienced since Martha died, the sense that his choices mattered, that standing for something meant something, even in this hard and unforgiving land. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. Today, he had earned the respect of warriors and the trust of a chief's daughter. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but maybe it was the one he needed. 2 weeks had passed since the Apache left, and Ayana had departed 3 days ago, strong enough finally to ride the horse Elias had given her, not his best, but a reliable mare that would see her safely to the sacred mountains. The ranch had returned to its familiar rhythms, morning coffee, checking the windmill, tending the small garden he'd coaxed from the desert soil. But something had changed in those 2 weeks, something that made Ghost pace the fence line and made Elias check the horizon more often than usual. The news had traveled, as news always did in the territory, twisted and magnified with each telling. At first, it had been simple truth Apache seen at the Brennan place. Then it became Apache raiders welcomed at the Brennan Ranch. By the time it reached the town of Brackett, 20 miles south, the story had Elias trading guns and ammunition to the enemy, harboring war parties, maybe even taking an Apache woman as his squaw. Elias had gone to town once for supplies, and the reception had been cold enough to freeze hell over. Thompson at the general store had served him in silence, counting his change twice as if Apache gold might somehow be different from the regular kind. The blacksmith had been busy, too busy to repair his broken harness despite the empty shop. Only old Mary Sutter had spoken to him, and that was to say she was praying for his soul. Now, watching the dust cloud approaching from the south, Elias knew his reckoning had come. This wasn't random travelers, the cloud was too organized, moving with purpose. He set down his coffee cup and went inside for his Winchester, checking the load more from habit than any plan to use it. Through the window, he counted riders as they became visible. 20 men, maybe more, riding in formation. Ghost started growling before they reached the gate, a low, continuous rumble that Elias had never heard from him before. The dog positioned himself on the porch, hackles raised, every muscle tense. "Easy, boy," Elias murmured, though he felt the same tension coiling in his own gut. The riders spread into a half circle before his cabin. a practiced maneuver that spoke of military experience. Most wore canvas dusters over their clothes, but Elias could see the glint of militia badges on several chests. They carried Henry repeating rifles across their saddles, cavalry gloves on their hands despite the heat. Spurs jangled as horses shifted, and more than one man had a wanted poster rolled in his saddlebag, the eternal optimism of bounty hunting in Apache territory. Captain Josiah Thornton rode at their center, a man Elias knew by reputation more than personal acquaintance. Thornton had fought in the war Confederate side and had brought his particular brand of order to the territory afterward. He sat his horse like he'd been born to it, which he probably had. Being Virginia aristocracy before the war took everything but his pride and his skill with violence. Thornton spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust, the brown streak landing deliberately close to Elias's porch. "Brennan?" he said by way of greeting. "Captain?" Elias replied, not moving from his doorway. The Winchester rested against the frame, visible but not threatening. Yet. "Heard you had some interesting visitors couple weeks back." "I've had lots of visitors lately. You'll have to be more specific." Thornton's eyes narrowed. "Don't play clever with me, boy. 300 Apache warriors don't surround a white man's ranch without the whole territory knowing about it. They weren't here for trouble. 300 Apache warriors are trouble just by breathing. What were they here for? A personal matter. There's no such thing as personal when it comes to Apache." Thornton shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. "You know what they did to the Hernandez spread. That was Comancheros, not Apache. Don't matter. Savages are savages." Several riders muttered agreement. Elias recognized a few faces: Tom Morrison from the Double Bar Ranch, the Slade brothers who ran cattle near the border, Deputy Lynch from town. Men he'd bought drinks for, shared news with at the general store. Now they looked at him like he was something scraped off their boots. "You harbored an Apache," Thornton continued. "Fed them, gave them aid and comfort. That makes you a traitor to your own kind." "I helped a woman dying of thirst. Since when is that a crime?" "Since that woman was Apache." Thornton leaned forward in his saddle. "You got any idea what message that sends? Every rancher in 50 miles is watching their backs, and you're serving tea to the enemy." "She wasn't my enemy. I haven't declared war on anybody." "War was declared the moment those savages refused to stay on the reservation. You're either with civilization or against it, Brennan." Ghost's growling intensified, and Elias put a hand on the dog's head to calm him. "Civilization, is that what you call this 20 armed men threatening one rancher? We're not threatening. We're explaining. See, the good citizens of Brackett and surrounds. We've formed ourselves a committee of safety, you might say. And we've decided that anyone who aids the Apache is as much a threat as the Apache themselves." "Vigilantes, you mean? Patriots." Tom Morrison spoke up. "Men willing to do what needs doing to protect our families. From what, an injured woman? From savages who'd kill us all in our beds." Morrison shot back. Deputy Lynch, younger than the others and clearly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Mr. Brennan, nobody wants trouble here. Just publicly denounce what you did. Say it was a mistake, that you were taken advantage of. Come to town, make it right, and this all goes away." "Make it right how?" "Join us," Thornton said simply. "Ride with the committee. Show everyone whose side you're on. And if I don't," Thornton's hand moved to rest on his pistol butt, casual but unmistakable, "then you're choosing to stand against us. And a man who stands with Apache against his own kind, well, that man might find life in this territory uncomfortable, might find his wells fouled, his cattle scattered, might find worse. You're threatening me. I'm explaining reality. Choose your side, or we'll choose for you." The silence stretched taut as a hangman's rope. 20 guns against one. 20 men waiting to see if Elias Brennan would bend or break. Ghost had stopped growling, but his body vibrated with tension, ready to launch himself at the first man who moved wrong. Elias looked at each face in turn. These were his neighbors, men he'd shared the struggles of frontier life with, but fear had twisted them into something else, something ugly and dangerous. He could join them, ride with them, become part of their violence. It would be easy, safe. He thought of Ayana's dignity as she'd ridden away, of Nietzsche's respect, earned through truth, of Martha, who'd always said a man's character was measured not by what he did when everyone was watching, but by what he chose when he stood alone. "I've already chosen my side," Elias said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "The human side. A person needed help. I gave it. If that makes me your enemy, then that's your choice, not mine. The human side." Thornton laughed, ugly and sharp. "Apache ain't human, boy. They're animals. Worse than animals, animals don't torture for pleasure. The only torture I've seen lately is 20 armed men trying to force one man to abandon his conscience." One of the Slade brothers reached for his rifle, but Thornton raised a hand to stop him. "You're making a mistake, Brennan. A fatal one. Maybe. Wouldn't be my first mistake. Probably won't be my last. This is your last warning. Denounce what you did, join us, or face the consequences." "I'll take the consequences." Thornton's face darkened. "You think that Apache medallion around your neck will protect you? You think Nietzsche's respect means anything to white men? You're a fool, and fools don't last long out here." "Maybe not, but at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror." "You'll be looking at yourself in a coffin if you're not careful." Deputy Lynch spoke up again, clearly distressed. "Captain, we said we'd talk to him, not—" "Shut up, boy," Thornton snapped. "Brennan here's made his choice. He stands with savages against his own kind. That makes him no better than them." He looked back at Elias. "You've got 1 week to reconsider. After that, you're on your own. No one will trade with you, help you, or mourn you when the desert claims you. You'll be a ghost before you're dead. If that's the price of keeping my conscience clean, I'll pay it. Your conscience won't keep you warm at night or put food in your belly. Neither will your committee." Thornton gathered his reins, preparing to leave, then turned back one more time. "That Apache woman, she bewitch you. That what this is about, you got yourself some savage lover." Elias felt his hands clench into fists, but he kept his voice level. "She was injured. I helped her. Then she left. That's the whole of it, and more than you deserve to know. We'll see about that, week from now, when you're begging for help and finding none. Remember, you chose this." He wheeled his horse around, and the others followed, though Deputy Lynch looked back once, something like apology in his eyes. They rode away in the same formation they'd arrived in, leaving dust and threats hanging in the air. Ghost finally relaxed, though he continued to stare after them, a low whine in his throat. Elias sat down heavily on his porch step, the Winchester across his knees. The medallion felt heavy against his chest, its weight both comfort and burden. He'd crossed a line today, chosen a side in a conflict he'd never wanted to join. The committee would make good on their threats. He knew Thornton's type, had seen what fear and hatred could drive men to do. But as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Elias felt something he hadn't expected: peace. Not the peace of safety or comfort, but the peace of alignment, of having his actions match his beliefs for perhaps the first time since Martha died. He'd stood in his doorway and chosen conscience over convenience, humanity over tribe. Tomorrow would bring what it brought: isolation, persecution, maybe worse. But tonight, he could close his eyes and see Martha's approving smile, feel his mother's hand on his shoulder. "I chose my side," he said to the empty desert, "the human side." Ghost padded over and laid his head on Elias's knee, and together they watched the stars emerge, each one a cold point of light in the vast darkness. Somewhere out there, Ayana was with her people. Somewhere else, Thornton was planning his next move. But here, in this moment, Elias Brennan sat on his porch, a man alone but not lonely, isolated but not abandoned. He'd made his choice. Now he had to live with it. The militia had been gone 3 hours, and Elias moved through his cabin with methodical purpose, preparing for siege. He pulled the heavy shutters, closed shutters he'd installed after Martha died. when the loneliness made him feel too exposed to the world. Now they would serve a different purpose. Each window got the same treatment, shutters closed, barred from inside with the oak beams he'd cut for fence posts but never used. His hands worked steadily, but his mind churned. The weight of what he'd done, what he'd chosen, pressed down like the heat before a storm. He'd lived 3 years as a ghost, neither part of the town nor separate from it. Now he'd declared himself a part, and the cost would come due soon enough. In the root cellar, he counted his supplies. 2 sacks of flour. Enough salt pork for a month if he was careful. Dried beans. Preserves Martha had put up the summer before she died. The well was good, they couldn't poison that without poisoning half the aquifer. But they could shoot his cattle, burn his hayrick, make his life hell in 1,000 small ways. He climbed back up, and Ghost whined from his spot by the door, sensing the tension. "I know, boy," Elias murmured. "We've stepped in it proper this time." At Martha's writing desk, he still thought of it as hers. He pulled out paper, the good stuff she'd ordered from St. Louis. The steel pen nibs were in their velvet-lined box, and he selected the finest one. If he was going to document this, he'd do it properly. The sealing wax was hard with age, and he had to work it between his fingers to soften it. The store-bought candles cast pools of yellow light as he began to write. "To whoever finds this letter, know that I, Elias Brennan, acted according to conscience in the matter of the Apache woman. I gave aid to a human being in distress. For this, I have been branded traitor by men who mistake fear for wisdom and violence for strength." He paused, remembering Martha's words from years ago, when he'd been struggling with whether to stand up to a corrupt land agent. "Elias," she'd said, her hands covered in flour from making bread, "moral courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing right anyway." He continued writing, documenting everything: Ayana's rescue, Naichi's visit, Thornton's threats. The clock chimed 11 as he finished the 3rd page, sealing it with wax and Martha's seal, the one with the dove carrying an olive branch. He placed the letter in the metal strongbox with their important papers, then sat back, exhaustion pulling at him. That's when Ghost's head snapped up, ears pricked forward, but he didn't growl. Instead, his tail gave a single, uncertain wag. A knock came at the door, soft, almost hesitant. Elias grabbed the Winchester, checking the load. Who would come at night? Not the militia, they'd announced themselves with gunfire. He approached the door carefully. "Who's there?" "A friend who stands between worlds." He knew that voice. Elias yanked open the door to find Ayana standing in his doorway like a ghost made flesh, dressed in traveling clothes, her horse tethered at the gate. She looked different, stronger than when she'd left, but also somehow more burdened. "You shouldn't be here," he said, even as he stepped aside to let her in. "It's dangerous." "Everything is dangerous now." She entered silently, her Apache moccasins making no sound on his floorboards. The scent of sage smoke clung to her clothes. "My father sent me. At night alone. I know every shadow between here and the sacred mountains. Your militia boys are watching the main trails, not the old paths." She moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. "They passed me 2 miles out, carrying torches, probably riding to spread news of your defiance. Why did Naichi send you?" She turned to face him, and in the candlelight, he could see something in her eyes he hadn't expected: concern. "He asks why you stand alone when you could join either side. The town would take you back if you renounced us. My people would shelter you if you came to the mountains. And abandon my ranch, my land. What good is land if you're dead?" Elias set down the rifle and moved to the stove, putting coffee on. His hands needed something to do. "This ranch is all I have left of my life with Martha. I can't just walk away. Even if staying means dying. We're all dying, just a question of how and when." Ayana settled into Martha's rocking chair. She'd claimed it during her recovery, and it seemed natural now. "My father doesn't understand you. Neither do I. White men usually choose the winning side. There is no winning side in this, just different ways of losing. Then why not choose the way that keeps you alive?" Elias poured coffee for both of them, the bitter scent filling the cabin. My mother used to tell a story about my grandfather. During the Revolution, he had a choice: join the Continental Army or stay with the British who controlled his town. He chose neither. Said he wouldn't kill his neighbors for any flag. What happened to him? Both sides burned his crops. He nearly starved, but he survived. And when the war ended, he was the only man in town who could look everyone in the eye. And you think you're like him? I think I'm trying to be. Ayanna sipped her coffee, wincing at its bitterness. The militia will come for you. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. I know. My people are watching too. Some want to use this say if the whites turn on their own. It proves they can't be trusted with peace. And what does Nietzsche say? He says you're either the bravest or most foolish white man he's met. She paused. He also says courage and foolishness often look the same until the outcome is known. They sat in silence for a moment, the clock ticking toward midnight. Finally, Ayanna spoke again. Why did you really help me? The truth now. Not what you told my father. Elias stared into his coffee. Because for 3 years, I've been dead inside. Just going through motions: tend the cattle, fix the fence, eat, sleep, repeat. When I found you in that canyon, for the first time since Martha died, I had a choice that mattered. Save a life or let it slip away. I chose life. Even knowing the cost of doing nothing would have been higher. I'd have had to live with it. And now I live with different consequences. But at least I feel alive facing them. Ayanna stood, moving to the jar where he kept his silver dollars, lifting it to study the coins in the candlelight. You could come with me tonight. My father would welcome you. And become the white man who turned Apache. How would that be different from what Thornton wants, choosing a side based on fear? It would keep you alive. I've been alive without living for 3 years. I won't do it again. She set down the jar, turning to face him fully. Then what will you do? Stand my ground. Board my windows. Defend what's mine if I have to. But I won't run. And I won't join either side's violence. You stand for peace in a land preparing for war. Someone has to. That someone usually dies first. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe others are tired of choosing sides too. Maybe standing alone shows them another way. Ayanna moved toward the door, then paused. There's something else. The militia isn't your only problem. There are young warriors, hot bloods who see your isolation as opportunity. They say a white man alone, abandoned by his people, would be an easy target for glory. And Nietzsche has forbidden it. But young men don't always listen to their elders, especially when they smell weakness. So I'm caught between 2 groups that want me dead. 3, actually. The Comancheros have heard about the Apache visiting your ranch. They think you might have gifts from Nietzsche, things worth stealing. Elias laughed, short and bitter. Martha always said I had a talent for making things complicated. This isn't funny. It's either laugh or scream, and screaming won't help. Ayanna pulled her traveling cloak tighter. I should go. If I'm seen here, it will make things worse for you. Things are about as worse as they can get. No, she said quietly. They can always get worse. She moved to the door, but before opening it, she turned back one more time. My father wanted me to tell you something. He said, strength is not in numbers. It's in knowing who you are and refusing to become less than that, no matter the cost. Wise man. He also said you remind him of a young Apache warrior he once knew, one who stood against his entire band to prevent the killing of Mexican children. That warrior died for his principles. What happened to the children? They lived, and years later, one became a voice for peace between our peoples. She opened the door, letting in the cool night air. Sometimes the dead change more than the living ever could. She slipped out into the darkness, and within moments, Elias heard her horse's hooves, quickly fading into silence. Ghost whined and pressed against his leg. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking out at the star-filled sky. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, and he was one man standing at its center, holding ground that mattered to no one but him. But it did matter to him. This piece of earth where Martha was buried, where their children lay, where he'd learned to love and lose and somehow keep going. He wouldn't abandon it for safety with either side. He'd stand here, alone if necessary, a testament to the possibility of choosing conscience over tribe. The silver dollars in the jar caught moonlight, and he remembered saving them with Martha, planning for a future that never came. Now they might buy him supplies if anyone would still trade with him, or they might just be metal discs marking time until whatever ending awaited. He closed the door, barred it, and blew out all but one candle. In the near darkness, he sat at the table and pulled out paper again. This time, he wrote a different letter. To Martha. I finally understand what you meant about moral courage. It's not about being right. It's about refusing to be wrong, even when being wrong would be easier. I'm alone now, but not lost. I found something in saving that Apache woman, not love, not friendship exactly, but purpose. The kind you always said would come when I stopped looking for it. Both sides want me to choose, but I choose to be the man you believed I was. Whether that kills me or saves me, at least I'll face it as myself. He sealed this letter too, placed it with the others. Then he loaded every gun in the house, filled every container with water, and settled in to wait for dawn. Whatever came next, he was ready. Not because he was brave or strong, but because he finally understood that some things were worth standing for. Even if you stood alone. Especially if you stood alone. Dawn came like a judgment, the sky bleeding red across the eastern mountains. Elias had been awake all night, watching through the cracks in his shutters as the stars wheeled overhead and faded into gray. He'd drunk the last of his coffee at 4, checked his Winchester one final time at 5. And now, as the first light touched his land, he saw what he'd been expecting and dreading in equal measure. Dust clouds. 2 of them, approaching from opposite directions. From the south, the organized column of the militia, their formation tight and military. From the north, flowing down from the sacred mountains like water, came the Apache. The timing couldn't be coincidence. Both forces had been watching, waiting, and somehow had chosen the same moment to converge on his small ranch. Elias stood slowly, his joints stiff from the night's vigil. He walked to Martha's wardrobe, still untouched after 3 years, and pulled out his wedding suit. The black wool was dusty but intact, the celluloid collar yellowed but serviceable. He dressed methodically, as if preparing for church or court or his own funeral, perhaps all 3 at once. The pocket watch Martha had given him on their 5th anniversary chimed 6 o'clock. Through the window, he could see both groups more clearly now. The militia had stopped at the southern boundary of his property, spreading out in a battle line. Thornton sat at their center, his posture rigid with military bearing. They numbered at least 30 now, more than before. Word had spread. Men had chosen their side. The Apache flowed over the northern ridge like a force of nature, their numbers impossible to count in the flowing movement. They didn't form ranks like the militia, but spread across the high ground, some mounted, some on foot, all armed. He spotted Naichi on his black stallion, motionless as a statue, watching. Both forces had stopped just outside rifle range of each other, with his ranch house squarely in the middle. The message was clear: this ground would be contested, and he was the excuse they'd use to contest it. Ghost pressed against his leg, whining. "Stay inside, boy," Elias said, pushing the dog back and closing the door firmly. Whatever happened next, Ghost didn't need to be part of it. He left the Winchester leaning against the doorframe, left his pistol on the table. If he was going to die this morning, it wouldn't be with a weapon in his hand. He stepped out onto his porch, the morning air cool against his face, and walked toward the space between the 2 forces. The leather cartridge belts of the militiamen caught the early light. Peace pipes were visible among some of the Apache warriors, but unlit. their potential for ceremony overshadowed by the presence of war lances and rifles. Sweat already stained the hatbands of men who'd ridden hard to be here for whatever was about to unfold. Thornton spurred his horse forward slightly. "Brennan, last chance. Join us or stand aside." From the north, a young Apache warrior shouted something in his language. Even without understanding the words, Elias could hear the challenge in them. He kept walking until he stood exactly between the two groups, in the open ground where no cover existed, where the first shot from either side would find him easily. Then he stopped, spread his arms wide, and spoke in a voice that carried across the morning stillness. "I stand with whoever puts down their weapons first." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Thornton laughed, ugly and sharp. "You damn fool. You think this is some kind of game?" "I think this is fear," Elias replied, keeping his arms spread. "Fear on both sides, looking for an excuse to become violence." "They're savages," Tom Morrison shouted from the militia line. "They'd kill us all if we gave them the chance." Elias turned slightly to address the Apache, though he kept his body facing both groups. "And they think you're invaders who break every promise, steal every piece of land, and call it civilization." "Whose side are you on?" Deputy Lynch called out, his young voice cracking slightly. "I'm on the side of water," Elias said, and saw confusion ripple through both groups. "This drought affects everyone, Apache, Mexican, American. Your cattle are dying. Morrison. Their children go thirsty. Chief Nietzsche. We're all fighting over less and less, while the real enemy is the land itself, challenging us to survive." He lowered his arms slowly, deliberately. "My well is deep. It hasn't run dry in the 3 years I've been here alone. I offer it to both sides. Come, water your horses, fill your canteens, but leave your weapons behind." "This is a trick," one of the Slade brothers called out. "The only trick," Elias said, "is the one where we convince ourselves that killing each other will somehow make the rain come, make the grass grow, make our lives easier. It won't. It never has." Nietzsche rode forward slightly, his movement causing every militiaman to tense. He spoke in English, his voice carrying with natural authority. "You would share your water with those who threaten you. Water has no prejudice, Chief. Neither should those who need it. And if we take your water and then fight anyway, then you prove yourselves less civilized than the desert, which at least kills without hatred." Thornton spat tobacco juice, the brown stream landing near Elias's feet. "Pretty words won't stop what's coming. Brennan, blood's been spilled on both sides. That demands answer. Blood's been spilled since Cain killed Abel. When does answering it with more blood become just another question that needs answering?" Elias pulled out his pocket watch, checking the time with deliberate calm. "It's past 6 now. By 7, the heat will start building. By noon, it'll be over 100 degrees. You can sit here, weapons drawn, waiting to see who dies first from bullets or heat stroke, or you can water your horses and remember what it means to be human." A young Apache warrior one of the hot bloods Ayana had warned him about rode forward aggressively, speaking rapid Apache. Nietzsche responded sharply, and the young man subsided but remained forward of the line. His lance pointed toward the militia. "Your hospitality is noted," Nietzsche said formally, "but water won't wash away what has been done." "No," Elias agreed, "but maybe it can prevent what hasn't been done yet." He turned his back on both groups, a calculated risk that made his shoulder blades itch, and walked to his well. The windmill creaked in the morning breeze, a familiar sound that seemed alien in the current tension. He worked the pump handle, filling the large wooden trough he used for his cattle. The water sparkled in the early light, clear and cold from deep underground. "The trough holds enough for all your horses," he called out without turning. "There are buckets and ladles hanging on the fence. Help yourselves." For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched so tight it seemed the slightest sound would shatter it into violence. Elias could feel the weight of eyes on him, Apache eyes, militia eyes, all waiting to see who would move first, who would show weakness or strength or whatever movement meant in this moment. Then he heard something unexpected, the soft footsteps of someone approaching on foot. He turned to see Ayanna walking down from the Apache line, having appeared from somewhere among the warriors. She moved with deliberate grace, her traveling dress replaced by traditional Apache clothing that marked her as the chief's daughter. She walked past Elias without acknowledging him, knelt by the trough, cupped water in her hands, and drank. The simple act seemed to break something in the air. She stood, water still dripping from her fingers, and looked directly at the militia line. Then she filled one of the ladles and held it out toward them, not offering exactly, but not withholding either. Just holding it, waiting. Deputy Lynch dismounted. The movement caused several militiamen to curse, Thornton to bark his name, but the young man kept walking. His spurs jangled with each step, absurdly loud in the silence. He reached the trough, took the ladle from Ayanna's hand with a slight nod, and drank. "Lynch, you get back here," Thornton roared. "My horse needs water." "Captain," Lynch replied, not looking back. "Been riding all night to get here." He led his horse to the trough. The animal drank gratefully, and Lynch stood there holding the reins, positioned between Ayanna and the militia, between worlds. An elderly Apache man dismounted next, not a warrior, but one of the elders who rode with them. He approached slowly, his weathered face unreadable. At the trough, he nodded to Lynch, who stepped aside to make room. The elder's horse drank beside Lynch's, two animals who knew nothing of the human divisions that separated their riders. "This is madness," Thornton declared, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. More movement. Tom Morrison's son, barely 16 and trying to look older with his attempt at a mustache, broke from the militia line. "Pa, my canteen's empty," he said over his shoulder. Not quite asking permission, but not defying either. Morrison cursed, but didn't stop him. The boy filled his canteen, and as he did, a young Apache warrior, perhaps the same age, approached from the other side. They looked at each other over the water barrel, two boys dressed for war but not yet hardened by it. The Apache said something. The Morrison boy shrugged, not understanding. Then the Apache pointed at the boy's canteen and mimed drinking. Morrison's son nodded and stepped back, letting the Apache fill his water bag. The trickle became a flow. Not all at once, not organized, but in ones and twos. Men from both sides approached the well. They didn't speak to each other. The divisions were too deep for that, but they shared the space, shared the water, shared the simple animal need for relief from thirst. Thornton held his position, as did Naichi. The two leaders watched from their respective lines as their men mingled carefully around the life-giving water. Some of the militia had removed their badges, tucking them into pockets. Some of the Apache had laid their lances across their horses' backs rather than holding them upright. Elias stood to the side, saying nothing, just watching. This wasn't peace, it was too fragile, too temporary for that word. But it was a pause, a moment where common need overshadowed manufactured hatred. An Apache woman appeared with children when had they arrived, and the smallest, a girl of perhaps 5, ran to the trough laughing, splashing water on herself. Her mother called sharply, but Deputy Lynch smiled and said, "Let her be. It's hot enough for all of us." The mother didn't understand the words but understood the tone. She nodded cautiously and let her daughter play while filling her own water vessels. The sun climbed higher, and the heat began to build as Elias had predicted. Men loosened collars, pushed back hats, wiped sweat from faces. The adobe dust settled on everyone equally, making them all the same colored, dust-covered humans in a hard land. Morrison himself finally rode forward, his horse clearly suffering. "Just the horse," he said to no one in particular, as if justifying the action to himself. But once there, he dismounted and splashed water on his own face, the relief evident in his groan. Even some of the Slade brothers had approached, though they kept their hands near their guns and their eyes on the Apache. But they drank. They all drank. Naichi suddenly spoke, his voice carrying across the scene. "This changes nothing." "No," Thornton agreed, finally riding forward but not dismounting. "It doesn't." "And yet," Elias said, loud enough for all to hear, Here you all are, sharing water, not killing each other. Seems like something's changed, even if you won't name it. One morning's truce doesn't erase years of blood, Thornton said. No, but it's one morning where no new blood is spilled. That's something. Naichi dismounted then, a decision that rippled through his warriors. He walked to the trough, cupped water in his hands, and drank. Then he looked at Thornton. Your men have taken Apache water from Apache streams for years. Today, Apache drink a white man's water from a white man's well. He paused. Perhaps the water doesn't care who drinks it. Water's water, Morrison said suddenly. Wet is wet. Don't matter who pumps it or who drinks it. It wasn't profound, but something in the simple truth of it seemed to resonate. Men nodded, Apache and militia alike, finding common ground in the most basic element of survival. Thornton finally dismounted, though he looked like it physically pained him to do so. He didn't approach the trough, but the symbolic gesture of putting his feet on the ground, of stepping down from his position of mounted authority, meant something. This doesn't mean we're friends, he said to Naichi. No, the chief agreed. But perhaps it means we don't have to be enemies today. And tomorrow the sun will rise, and we will see what it brings. The Morrison boy and the young Apache warrior were now showing each other their knives not threateningly, but with the universal pride young men take in their weapons. The Apache had a traditional blade with intricate handlework. The Morrison boy had a Bowie knife his father had given him. They didn't share a language, but they shared an appreciation for good steel. Elias felt the medallion Naichi had given him, warm against his chest through his shirt. He thought of Martha, of what she would say if she could see this moment. Probably something practical like, well, at least they're not shooting each other. As if reading his thoughts, Ayana appeared beside him. You did something today, she said quietly. I offered water. You offered a different path. Not all will take it, but some will remember that it exists. The gathering was breaking up naturally now, men returning to their lines but without the rigid tension of before. Conversations had started within each group, arguments probably, about what had just happened, what it meant, what should happen next. Naichi mounted his horse and raised his hand. His people began to withdraw, not in retreat, but in ordered departure. Before leaving, he looked at Elias and nodded a gesture that could mean many things or nothing at all. Thornton was gathering his men, too, though with less organization. Some seemed reluctant to leave, still discussing what they'd witnessed. Deputy Lynch approached Elias before mounting up. That was brave, Mr. Brennan. Stupid, maybe, but brave. Sometimes they look the same. Deputy. Captain's not happy. This won't be the end of it. I know, but it's not the beginning either. That's something. Lynch nodded and returned to his horse. The militia rode away in smaller groups, not the unified force that had arrived. Some looked back. Morrison actually tipped his hat, not quite friendly, but acknowledging something. Soon, Elias stood alone by his well, the trough still full of water that reflected the morning sky. Ghost scratched at the door, and he let the dog out. Ghost ran immediately to the trough, sniffing at the ground where so many strangers had stood, his tail wagging uncertainly. I know, boy, Elias said, slumping against the fence. I don't quite believe it either. He'd walked out between two armies and somehow walked back. He'd offered water instead of words, simplicity instead of speeches. And it had worked not to create peace, but to create a pause. Sometimes a pause was all you could hope for. The sun was fully up now, the heat building toward another scorching day. But for one morning, beside one well, Apache and Americans had stood together as humans facing the same harsh land, sharing the same basic need. It wasn't much. It might not last. But it was something. And sometimes, Elias thought as he walked back to his cabin, something was better than nothing. Sometimes, Something was everything. The dust from the departing riders had barely settled when Elias heard hoofbeats again. His hand moved instinctively toward the Winchester before he recognized the lone rider approaching from the west, neither militia nor Apache, but old Miguel Herrera from the neighboring ranch, leading a pack mule. "Senor Brennan?" Miguel called out, his weathered face creased with worry. "I saw them from the ridge, both armies. Thought I would find you dead." "Not yet, Miguel, though the day's still young." The old vaquero dismounted, his movements stiff from decades in the saddle. "What happened here? The ground is covered with tracks, but no blood." "They came for water," Elias said simply. "Both sides." Miguel's eyebrows rose. "And you lived, apparently?" Miguel studied the scene, the full trough, the mixed footprints, the tin ladles still hanging on the fence posts. "My grandfather used to say that water makes all men brothers, even if they forget it when their bellies are full." "Your grandfather was a wise man. He was Apache," Miguel said quietly, something he'd never mentioned in 3 years of neighboring. "My grandmother was Mexican. I am neither and both, so I stay away from such gatherings." Before Elias could respond, more riders appeared on the southern horizon. His stomach clenched until he recognized Deputy Lynch returning, but not alone. With him rode the Morrison boy and, surprisingly, Mary Sutter from town, her wagon loaded with what looked like supplies. "Mrs. Sutter," Elias called out as they approached. "Don't look so shocked, Mr. Brennan," she said, climbing down from her wagon with surprising agility for a woman of 70. "I've been praying for your soul, and the Lord told me to do more than pray." Lynch dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "She insisted on coming. Mr. Brennan said if you were declaring neutral ground, someone needed to make it official-like." "Official." Mary Sutter pulled out a wooden sign from her wagon. In neat, painted letters. It read, "Brennan's Well All Welcome. No weapons. No fighting." "Made it myself," she said proudly. "My late husband was a sign painter. Taught me the trade." The Morrison boy had wandered to the trough, where he knelt and cupped water to drink. "Pa don't know I came back," he said between gulps. "But something about this morning, it didn't sit right, leaving like that." More movement from the north. 3 Apache riders approaching slowly, their hands visible and empty. Elias recognized one as the young warrior who'd shown his knife to the Morrison boy. They stopped at what seemed to be an invisible line, waiting. "Come ahead," Elias called out. "The well's still open." They rode in cautiously, and the young warrior dismounted near the Morrison boy. For a moment, the 2 young men just looked at each other. Then the Apache pointed at the sign Mary Sutter was holding and raised an eyebrow in question. "It says all are welcome," the Morrison boy explained, then realized the language barrier. He tried gestures instead, pointing at the well, at everyone present, then spreading his arms wide. The Apache seemed to understand, nodding slowly. Deputy Lynch had pulled out paper and pencil from his saddlebag. "If we're doing this, might as well do it proper. Mr. Brennan, you're declaring your ranch neutral ground. I'm declaring my well available to anyone who comes in peace." "That's not how the law—" "The law," Mary Sutter interrupted. "Young man, the law barely reaches past the town limits. Out here, we make our own law. And if Elias Brennan says his water is free to all, then that's law enough." The Apache warriors had been talking among themselves. One rode closer, an older man with silver in his hair. In careful English, he said, "Naiche says, this place, no fighting place. Apache honor this." "Will Thornton honor it?" Miguel asked. Lynch shifted uncomfortably. The captain wasn't happy about this morning, but half his men are talking about it, Morrison especially, saying maybe there's another way. "There's always been another way," Mary Sutter said, directing the Morrison boy and one of the Apache to hold her sign while she nailed it to a post. "We just get too proud to see it sometimes." The sound of her hammer rang across the desert, each blow like a declaration. When she finished, the sign stood crooked but clear, visible from both the northern and southern approaches to the ranch. By noon, word had somehow spread. A few more people trickled in a Mexican family who'd been afraid to travel the roads with both militia and Apache about. 2 Buffalo soldiers separated from their unit, even one of the Slade brothers, though he claimed he was just checking on a stray cow. Elias found himself playing reluctant host, keeping the peace through nothing more than quiet presence and steady provision of water. The Morrison boy and the young Apache warrior had progressed to comparing horses, each clearly impressed with the other's mount. Mary Sutter had started a pot of coffee on Elias's stove, declaring that civilization began with coffee and proceeded from there. As the sun reached its zenith, Nietzsche himself returned, this time with Ayanna. They rode to the edge of the property, and Nietzsche called out, "Brennan, we would speak." Elias walked out to meet them, aware of everyone watching. Nietzsche dismounted, a gesture of respect, and Ayanna translated as her father spoke in Apache. "My father says this morning something shifted. Not peace. He's not naive, but a crack in the wall between peoples. He asks if you will maintain this neutral ground. As long as I'm alive and the well has water." Nietzsche spoke again, and Ayanna continued. "He offers this on each full moon. Apache will come here to trade, not raid, not war, but trade. Blankets for tools, horses for cloth. If whites wish to trade too, they may come, but any violence on this ground will be met with punishment from both sides. That's a big promise. Can you keep it?" "Can you?" Ayanna asked. "Your Captain Thornton isn't my captain. And if he wants to stop peaceful trading, he'll have to explain why to the merchants in town who've been complaining about lack of Apache goods to sell back east." Deputy Lynch had approached close enough to hear. "I can take that proposal to the mayor. He's a practical man. If there's money in it, he'll make Thornton see sense." "Money," Nietzsche said in English, shaking his head. "Always money with whites. And survival with Apache," Elias replied. "We're all just trying to get by." Nietzsche studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. Elias shook it, feeling the calluses of a lifetime of weapons and reins, not so different from his own. "Full moon," Nietzsche said. "We come." 3 months later. The October full moon rose over Brennan's ranch, now barely recognizable as the isolated homestead it had been. Temporary structures had sprouted around the well lean-tos and awnings where traders displayed their wares. The morning's frost had given way to a mild afternoon, and now, as evening approached, 3 distinct fires were being lit. The Apache camp was to the north, their fire burning with aromatic mesquite that scented the air for miles. The settlers' fire was to the south, larger and less organized, with coffee pots and Dutch ovens clustered around it. And in the center, near the well itself, Elias tended a third fire, neutral ground where both sides could meet if they chose. Ghost, no longer alone, watched over a tumble of puppies near the cabin porch. Their mother, a rangy shepherd mix, had appeared one day following the Morrison boy, and nature had taken its course. The puppies were claimed already 2 for Apache children, 2 for town families, 1 for Miguel Herrera, and 1 staying with Elias. His garden had expanded with help from unexpected sources. Ayanna had shown him where to find wild plants that thrived in drought conditions. Mary Sutter had brought seeds from her own garden. Even some of the militiamen, awkward and uncertain, had helped dig irrigation channels from the well. Tonight's gathering was the 3rd since the agreement. The first had been tense, everyone armed despite the rules, watching for the first sign of betrayal. The second had been better. Actual trading had occurred, though groups stayed largely separate. Now, on this 3rd meeting, Elias could see the boundaries blurring slightly. The Morrison boy, who'd become a regular visitor, was at the Apache fire, learning to play some kind of gambling game with colored stones. His father stood with the settlers, watching with disapproval but not intervening. Deputy Lynch moved between groups, having appointed himself unofficial peacekeeper, checking that no one had brought weapons beyond knives. Mary Sutter had set up what she called a blessing table, where she offered coffee and cornbread to anyone, regardless of origin. "The Lord doesn't check papers at Heaven's Gate," she declared to anyone who'd listen. "Neither do I." Miguel Herrera had become the unofficial translator, his mixed heritage finally an asset rather than a liability. He stood now with a group of Apache women and town wives, helping them negotiate a trade of woven blankets for mason jars and preserving supplies. Thornton had come to the first gathering, standing at the edge of firelight, watching with his hand on his pistol. He'd left without trading, without speaking, but also without violence. He hadn't returned since, though Elias knew he was watching from afar, waiting for the experiment to fail. "It won't last," Ayanna said, appearing beside Elias at the central fire. She'd taken to coming early to these gatherings, helping him prepare. "Maybe not," Elias agreed, "but it's lasted 3 months. That's 3 months of no raids, no ambushes, no blood. There are still those on both sides who want war. There always will be. But look." He gestured to where an Apache grandmother was showing the Morrison boy's mother how to grind mesquite pods into flour. Every peaceful connection makes the next one easier. A commotion near the Apache fire drew their attention. Swift Knife, the scarred warrior from Naichi's inner circle, was arguing with a younger warrior. The dispute grew heated, and people began backing away. The old fear surfacing immediately, Elias started forward, but Naichi was already there, speaking sharply. The young warrior gestured angrily toward the settlers' camp, and Swift Knife responded by pointing at the sign Brennan's Well still standing, though weathered now. The tension peaked when the young warrior reached for his knife. Before he could draw it, the Morrison boy stepped between him and Swift Knife, hands empty but stance firm. "No fighting," he said clearly. "Not here. This is neutral ground." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then the young Apache warrior laughed short and bitter but stepped back. He said something in Apache that made others laugh too, though nervously. Miguel translated quietly for Elias. "He says the white boy has learned Apache courage. Or Apache foolishness," the Morrison boy replied, understanding the tone if not the words. This time the laughter was genuine, and the tension dissolved like morning mist. The young warrior walked away, not happy but controlled. Swift Knife nodded to the Morrison boy, a warrior's acknowledgement to another warrior. As the evening deepened, Elias found himself standing between the 3 fires, watching the shadows of different peoples move and merge and separate. A year ago, he'd been alone with his ghosts. Now, his ranch hosted this fragile experiment in coexistence. "Your wife would be proud," Mary Sutter said, joining him with a cup of coffee. "She'd probably say I was a fool for getting involved." "No. Martha understood that some things are worth the risk. She'd have been right here beside you, probably teaching Apache children their letters and scandalizing the town." A child's laughter rang out, an Apache girl playing with one of Ghost's puppies, her parents watching with cautious smiles. Nearby, Deputy Lynch was attempting to learn Apache words from Swift Knife, mangling them badly enough to cause good-natured laughter. The October wind picked up, causing all 3 fires to flicker and dance. For a moment, their light seemed to merge, creating one pool of warmth against the cold desert night. It wouldn't last, nothing ever did, but it existed now, in this moment. "Mr. Brennan," the Morrison boy called out, "the Apache are starting their evening ceremony. They're asking if you'll join them." Elias looked at the Apache fire, where Naichi stood waiting, then at the settlers' fire, where people watched to see what he'd do. Finally, at his own central fire, where Ayanna tended the flames that belonged to no one and everyone. "Tell them I'll join them after I tend my own fire," he said. "All 3 need feeding if they're going to last the night." He moved between the 3 camps, adding wood to each fire, a simple act that had become his role, the keeper of flames, the tender of neutral ground. At each fire, he was greeted differently with respect at the Apache camp. Uncertainty at the settlers, comfortable familiarity at his own, but he was greeted, he was acknowledged, he belonged, not to any one group, but to the space between them. As the moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the desert, Elias stood by his well and watched the gathering. Traders haggled, children played, Women shared recipes and remedies. Men compared horses and told lies about their hunting prowess. It was messy and imperfect and fragile as spring ice. But it was real. Tomorrow, they'd all go back to their separate worlds. The Apache to their mountains, the settlers to their towns, Elias to his ranch. But next month, they'd return. And maybe, just maybe, each gathering would make the next one a little easier, a little more natural. Until someday, not soon, but someday the grandchildren of these people would wonder why their grandparents had ever thought sharing water was remarkable. The sign by the well creaked in the wind. Brennan's well, all welcome. No weapons, no fighting. Simple rules for a complicated world. But sometimes simplicity was all that was needed. Sometimes water was just water, and people were just people. And that was enough to build on. Elias raised his coffee cup to the moon in a silent toast to Martha, to his mother, to all the ghosts who'd brought him to this moment. Then he walked back to the Apache fire, where Naichi made room for him in the circle, and sat down to learn what other bridges could be built, one careful conversation at a time. Elias Brennan's journey reminds us that moral courage isn't found in grand gestures, but in simple acts of human decency. When he gave water to a dying woman, he didn't see an Apache enemy, he saw a person in need. That single choice rippled outward, transforming his isolated existence into something far greater, a bridge between worlds. The story teaches us that family isn't always blood, and community isn't always those who look like us. Elias found his true family in unexpected places, in Ayana's dignity, in Naichi's respect, in young men from opposite sides sharing knives and stories by his well. His gratitude for these connections, born from loss and loneliness, gave him strength to stand alone when both sides demanded he choose. Sometimes standing for justice means standing in the middle, arms spread wide, refusing to let fear divide us. Elias proved that neutrality isn't weakness, it's the courage to say, both of you are human, when everyone insists on picking sides. Have you ever been branded a traitor or outsider like Elias, simply for showing kindness to someone others considered the enemy? When did doing the right thing cost you your standing in your community?